Hi, this is Craig Dellinger with a review of the Exped Synmat UL 7 for ProLite Gear.com. This pad is very similar in terms of specifications to the Thermarest NeoWear Trekker in that this pad comes in at 16 ounces with an RValue of 3.1, which this pad is 17 ounces with an RValue of 3. The difference is that the Exped Synmat UL 7 costs $165, whereas the NeoWear Trekker costs $130. So that's why we gave this pad our Best Value Award and not this pad. This pad uses vertical baffles, and I don't think this pad sleeps as comfortably as the horizontal baffles that are used in the NeoWear Trekker. Although I will say that the Exped Synmat UL 7 is a far more comfortable and more stable pad to be on than the Exped Down Mat 5. And the reason is that this uses more of an I-beam construction in the baffles, whereas the Exped Down Mat 5, the baffles run all the way through and just makes this to be a very wobbly, uncomfortable pad to sleep on. So we don't like this pad in terms of comfort. This pad was much better. One other thing I don't like about this pad is the inflating valve. This pad comes with two air valves on it, one used for inflating the pad and one used for deflating the pad. They're on the back of the pad up at the head end of the pad. The inflating valve is a one-way valve, so that's why they give you a separate valve for deflating it. While that's handy if you've got the pad tipped upside down to have those two valves, what I don't like about it is that with any inflatable pad, you need to kind of dial in the air pressure inside the pad to your own personal preference in terms of comfort. With a twist valve that's up near the head, you can inflate the pad, hop in your sleeping pad, or hop in your sleeping bag, hop on the pad and just reach over your shoulder and gradually let some air out until you get that air pressure dialed in exactly where you want it. You can't do that with this air valve configuration that's used in the Exped UL 7 or Synmat UL 7. So you have to kind of know when you're inflating it how much air you like in it, and it's very difficult to use that deflating valve since it just pops wide open to fine-tune your air pressure. So I think that's a pretty big limitation with this pad. Also, as a rule, we are not big fans of using synthetic insulation or down insulation inside sleeping pads. And let's quickly go into why designers use insulation in pads. And let's compare that to why they use synthetic or down insulation in a down jacket or a sleeping bag. In a down jacket or a sleeping bag, the insulation is there to create volume or loft inside the baffle, and that's to create the dead airspace. Once you have that dead airspace, the temperature gradient inside each baffle is going to cause a convection air current unless there's something in the way to prevent that air from freely moving. You know, the ideal thing the designers are trying to get is dead air within each baffle. In a sleeping pad that's inflated with air, you don't need insulation to create volume inside each baffle. That's done via the air that's under pressure. So the role that insulation is playing inside an inflatable sleeping pad is to restrict or inhibit air movement inside each baffle. So these have nice large baffles, and so you've got to put synthetic insulation or down insulation in there, or you're going to get too much convective air current. And I'll use the Big Agnes Double Z as an example of a sleeping pad that has really big baffles, but nothing engineered into it to reduce air current, and that's why this really thick 4-inch pad only has an R value of 1.5, and R values start at 1 and go to 9.5. So very little thermal efficiency or thermal resistance in a Big Agnes Double Z. So this has an R value of 3.1, so that insulation is doing something to help it out. I prefer what Thermarest is doing with their NeoWear series with their triangular baffles that create over 100 individual cells inside each sleeping pad, because those are reducing the temperature gradient within each cell and reducing the amount of convection-based air currents that are happening inside this pad, making this a much more thermally effective or thermally efficient pad. Let's see here. The other thing we don't like about putting synthetic or down insulation in pads is that if you're on a multi-day trip and you're blowing them up with your mouth, you're starting to get a buildup of moisture inside these pads because of all that surface area from the synthetic or down insulation. It just gives the water molecule something to cling to. So if you're going to use this pad, you need to use the storage sack that, the pump that you can purchase for them, ideally. And also you're going to want to pay attention to how you store these. I'm going to create a video that talks specifically about the proper way to store inflatable sleeping pads when they're not being used. The surface of this fabric is slippery, unlike the NeoWear Xtherm and X-Lite, which use a siliconized fabric on them to give them a slight tackiness so you don't slip off them as much. The designers put a slightly larger baffle on the outside of these. That's designed to keep you centered in the pad, but my experience is once I get beyond the point of no return of that larger exterior baffle, I just fall right off these pads. So while I'm not trying to be too negative with this pad, the reality is if you compare these pads side by side and you have something like the NeoWear Xtherm, the NeoWear X-Lite, or the NeoWear Trekker, these pads are just going to be far superior when placed side by side next to this pad. I put all this information into an article that I published over at ProLiteGear.com. If you're watching this video on YouTube, check in the description below and you'll find a link to that article. If you have any questions, we're happy to answer the phone and talk to you. You can give us a call at 406-582-0508 or send us an email to info@ProLiteGear.com. Thanks for watching our reviews and thank you for subscribing to our channel.